And in fact, this is the sort of first of our three categories over here. We're going to talk about precursors, and what I mean by precursors are the conditions that led up to the Depression. We're not in the Depression yet, that's the pre part, but these are the conditions that led to it. So one of it was high personal consumption. People were back, most of them were employed, families were established, stable, and so people went out and bought things. One of the things that helped this sort of consumption part of GDP grow so nicely was the fact that sort of the American manufacturing industry started bringing to the market a lot of home appliances that we'd never seen before, labor-saving things. Electric irons and washing machines and ice boxes and things that we hadn't known before or had only been available in some form to very rich people. Now, because of changes and improvements in manufacturing and all these products were now available to just a regular family. And then Henry Ford, with his assembly line and making a car, was exactly the same thing that was going on. Exactly the same thing. All of a sudden, it used to be the only way you could get a car was for somebody to hand make it, like Rolls-Royce or Bentley or something. And so then only the rich people could afford it. But once Henry Ford figured out how to make these in an assembly line and paid okay, but much cheaper wages, he didn't have to pay craftsman wages, he just had to pay manual worker wages, he could develop these cars that actually people could afford to buy. So lots of consumption. Also, new homeowners. Some of the same economic stability that that caused the consumption to go up, that people could now actually consider buying their own homes. We saw a growth in what later became the savings and loan associations, typically local small-town banks, where people could deposit their money and earn some interest on it, and then those banks turned them around and offered mortgages for people in order to buy their homes. And again, this was something that had not been available before. So home ownership in the previous to this had been much more limited to upper class people who could actually assemble the money to actually buy a house. But now it was possible to borrow. Now, we're not talking subprime loans or any of those kinds of problems. We're talking about people actually being able to borrow, but it was something they hadn't been able to do before. So all of a sudden, we had a lot more people who were buying homes. Now, as a result of this demand, both for goods and the homes and then all the stuff that goes in a home, like appliances and so on, as a result of this, industrial output increased. Industrial capacity, let's call it that. Industrial capacity increased. Businesses developed and grew to meet all this demand during the Roaring '20s. They added new factories, put on an extra shift, sometimes even a graveyard shift, in order to build. And so huge expansion, huge investment. That's the I part of GDP. Remember C, I, G, and an X. So the I part of GDP increased as industries invested in building more factories and expanding their output and so on. So it was a heavy time for them. Now, the other thing that happened was, well, two other things. One is the stock market went up pretty significantly. Stocks rose. Everybody get that? It's just as a phrase. So during this period of time, there was much more interest in investing in stocks in American business, and for a variety of reasons, the value of those stocks started going up in a long upward march. It used to be, stock investment used to be only available to the wealthy. You had to kind of know your way around it, and it seemed like a very risky thing. And prior to the Roaring '20s, people would have shied away. Your average middle-class family would have shied away from having any any money in a stock. The riskiest thing they could do was put their money in a bank, and even weren't really sure about that. But by the 1920s, people were starting to see, gosh, you could make a lot of money in the stock market. Now, the other thing that happened is that banks bought stock too. Let me go back and refresh this. We talked about this just briefly last week. Let me go back and refresh how a bank's finances look. And we'll look from a financial point of view, we'll look at their balance sheet, i.e. their assets and their liabilities. And then the way balance sheets work, that this left-hand side has to equal the right-hand side. Assets are all the things you own. Liabilities is all the money that you owe somebody else. And net worth is kind of, in a sense, what you owe the owners. It's the value of the organization over and above. So if you had $100 million in assets and you had $60 million in liabilities, then that means you owe $40 million. See how they balance out, the 100 against the 60 plus 40? Okay. So using those numbers, though, let's take a look and see how a bank would have its balance sheet. On the deposit side, on your asset side, you'd have deposits, the money that people brought in, like that $100 bill I found in the backyard. So there'd be money that people might have bought in, and now the bank has it. So that's an asset. Over here, owe to accounts, to me, if I brought in the $100, then they owe me that $100 at some point. And so these two things balance out. I bring $100 in, now they have the money, but they owe me that money back if I want to write a check on it or come into the bank and withdraw it. And then typically what banks do is that they loan it out. And the way that works is that, let's say they had this $100 in the bank, then what the bank will do is only keep, let's say, $10 of that in cash. And what they'll do is they'll take the other $90 and loan it out. We talked about this last week. They'll loan out that $90. So that $90 goes out the door, but if they're loaning it to somebody there who's borrowing it is signing a piece of paper saying, I promise to pay that back to you. So from the bank's point of view, that piece of paper has a value. It's worth $90 because somebody has signed an enforceable contract saying that, I'll pay you back the $90. So our balance is still preserved. It's just that we only have $10 now plus a $90 piece of paper that's worth $90, but 90 plus 10 is still equal to the 100. How are we doing so far? Have I lost anybody? Okay, so that's fine, and that's how banks make money. They loan the money out, they earn some interest on it. That's the traditional way that banks make money. What started happening here in the precursor era, sort of in the roaring 20s, is the banks, just like middle-class families, the banks were saying, wow, look at that stock market. There's tons of money being made there, and in fact, they can make a lot more money investing in the stock market than they can making loans. So instead, what they started to do is started buying stocks themselves. The banks themselves would buy stock in other companies, hoping to earn some money off of it. So they might not loan as much out. Maybe they'd only loan sort of $50 out, and then instead of loaning full 90, they put maybe 40 of those dollars into buying stocks, just like any other investor might buy stocks. And for a while, in the mid-20s, that was a pretty sweet deal for them. That was a pretty sweet deal for them because they were earning a lot more money. The value of their stocks went up much quicker than the interest they were earning on their loans. So it's pretty exciting stuff.